Welcome to Sir Lancelot's Real Estate Roundtable, your guide to mastering the realm of real estate in Central East Florida. I am Sir Lancelot Leonard, ready to uncover the secrets of seller strategies, home staging, mortgage mastery, and more. From Daytona Beach to Cocoa Beach, Lake County to St. Augustine, join me as we navigate the intricacies of real estate. As the leader of the Sir Lancelot Group at Florida Homes Realty and Mortgage, I'm here to arm you with knowledge and innovation, whether you're a seasoned homeowner or a first-time buyer, unveiling the kingdom of real estate, one roundtable at a time. Welcome back to the Real Estate Roundtable, where we sit down with the boldest voices shaping the future of real estate. Today's guest is someone every investor, developer, and agent needs in their corner, Brian Bradley. Brian isn't just a top-tier real estate attorney. He's the founder of BTB Legal, a go-to firm for high-stakes transactions, title disputes, and airtight contract negotiations. With a sharp legal mind and a passion for protecting clients, Brian has become a trusted shield for real estate professionals navigating today's legal minefields. He's also the author of the #1 best-selling book, Overexposed, where he pulls back the curtain on the legal loopholes that leave investors vulnerable and how to close them for good. If you're ever wondered whether your LLC really protects you or what asset protection trust can do that your insurance can't, then buckle up. This conversation will change the way you view real estate law forever. Let's get into it. Welcome, Brian, to the show.
Yeah, thanks, Lancelot, for having me on, or I don't know if you go by like Sir Lancelot, but this is going to be a critical conversation, especially now. We're in a moment of time where the legal and financial and political systems are just shifting fast, and most people aren't prepared for what's coming. So this episode is going to be not just important, but it's going to be really necessary.
I'm sure. I agree with you. Brian, before we dig into LLCs and asset protection trusts, take us back. What made you decide to focus your legal career on protecting investors? Was there a moment where you realized the system wasn't built to keep them safe?
Yeah, so I came into asset protection from actually being a trial lawyer and the litigation side of law, which is a bit different. Like I wasn't drafting theoretical strategies. I was actually dealing with the aftermath in court. And I saw, real families, business owners, doctors, and real estate investors losing everything. And not because they didn't work hard, but because they were just misled by advisors who gave them, generic, incomplete strategies. And I don't mean intentionally misled. I don't want people to think that, but they just, don't know what they don't know. And most people don't realize this, but asset protection, which we'll even define that, later on, but asset protection is not taught in law school. It's not on the bar exam. It's not part of most law firms' daily practice. So what you get instead are, business attorneys or estate planners or CPAs that are dabbling in this space, giving, just form an LLC type of advice that gives clients this false sense of security. And what this means is that there's a serious, gap in knowledge. And so most of my clients come to me after being told by someone else that they were protected until they realized too late once they got sued that they actually weren't. And I just kept hearing the same recycled advice, like just form an LLC, go get insurance, have a revocable living trust, you're good to go. But that's like telling someone in a flood zone just to wear sandals and hope for the best. But you built wealth, and then our job here is just to make sure that it doesn't end up in someone else's hands through a broken legal system. And so then I just started training with the top asset protection firms in the nation about a decade ago, trying to figure out what were the best strategies. And then I transitioned my entire practice to focus exclusively on asset protection because it just fit my personality. I really like the law. I really like taxes. I really like investing. And it kind of was, I was able to hit all the buckets that I'm really passionate about in one specific area of law. And then as I was practicing this, I really, came to realize that you don't rise to the level of your income. You actually fall to the level of the legal structure when things start going wrong. But here's what people need to understand from this, background is just like in medicine, not all lawyers are created equal. Like you wouldn't go to your family doctor for brain surgery, and you shouldn't go to like your estate planner or your nephew Frank, the business attorney, for asset protection. They're just different specialties. Asset protection is very nuanced. It takes deep planning and experience to build structures that are going to actually hold up in court. That cheap DIY tricks and like smoke and mirrors, like they're just going to fall apart when push comes to shove. But what I find after talking to over like 99% of all my clients is that what you've done so far generally isn't wrong. It's just incomplete. And what a lot of people are trying to do is go, have a sword fight while holding a paper shield. And so it's our job is just to add more armor and the proper layers.
Oh, that's a really good summarization of that. And you seeing in the legal system that what was that you saw in the legal system that convinced you that asset protection wasn't optional anymore, that was like the thing that needed to be done?
Yeah, well, one is like, the legal system, a lot's changed over the last, 40 years. And it's really not about just justice anymore, but redistributing wealth and using the actual legal system and the bureaucracy itself as a mechanism and tool to attract the providers and the earners, right? And so part of this was transitions in the law from now having, contingency fee attorneys where you don't have any skin in the game, law from advertising. And those were just really big cultural shifts that over time created a predatory legal system to where attorneys just started advertising like, okay, we can just start suing for settlements. And that's a way to start making money. And the sad thing is a lot of high risk, high net worth people don't see themselves that way, especially if you come up from your scratch, and they don't think of $1 million is high net worth. But the person who's renting your rental property sees you as wealthy. You're driving a BMW or Mercedes. They see you, you get in a car accident, you're going to be presumed as wealthy. So there's a identity problem as well as most rich people or high net worth people don't presume and see themselves that way, but you still have this really big red target on your back that we have to protect you from. And so what it really is, I started thinking about it recently is a lot of people think one-on-one, lawsuit like plaintiff defendant, Lancelot is suing Brian. And the reality of it is actually we're protecting clients from a broader enemy, which is really the bureaucracy and the system that actually fuels this fire. And so this is what asset protection systems have to protect you on is when they're done right and layered out is a system that's not geared to be your friend and for justice, but to redistribute and take your wealth.
Oh, got you. And can you tell us about a real life case, of course, without names, where someone thought they were protected but weren't really protected?
Yeah, I mean, I just had a call a couple of days ago from a doctor who is out in California and he owned property out in Jersey and got sued for medical malpractice, had his rental property in Jersey in an LLC. What ended up happening was he didn't know that he rented out the property to a gang member. And there's a
Wow.
party, gang fight breaks out, guns were pulled, somebody was shot and killed. On who gets sued for, wrongful death, negligence, Mr. Rich Doctor, white coat doctor. And so now he's, fighting this multi-million dollar lawsuit, and his LLC gets pierced. Now what? Right. And so the issue is like you really never know where the lawsuit is going to come from or how. A lot of it could just be deals falling apart or from your profession or just negligence of your own life. The sad thing is then we have to think about like what happens when the first layer, the LLC, gets pierced and what's even wrong with those. And that's why we add layers later on. But it's a lot of those are just like one common situation. Other ones are like mold issues that can happen in properties. Like I said, most people when they're doing partnerships, it's generally the partnerships that fall apart where large lawsuits end up happening. So people don't really realize that. Or if you're in business, realize you're an employer and employment law claims then start happening and like discrimination, harassment, wage and hour, those are very expensive lawsuits as well. So we got to start looking at like all the different areas and avenues that risk can happen, not just like one finite, personal injury level.
Well, that makes a lot of sense. You touched on a lot of things there. I think we can open those up down the line. Next question is why are the LLCs not the bulletproof asset shields we've been told they are?
Yeah, do you want to should we define even what like asset protection is first and then jump into
Yeah, let's
LLC.
go. Let's go do that. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, that way people we don't have to backtrack too much and be like, what is this stuff even about?
Sure, let's do that. So,
Yeah,
what
so
is
I think
asset protection?
yeah, so I think we need to because this is one of the most mystifying terms, and I get a lot of calls of people thinking, they understand what asset protection is, and I'm like, that's not asset protection, that's called illegal. And so what asset protection is simply placing a legal barrier between your assets and a potential creditor, like the person suing you, before there's a problem. And I'm going to say that again, before in big capital words, there's a problem. That's it. It's just like a safe. You wouldn't, leave your guns or your gold or your precious gems just sitting out on the porch. You lock them up. Same with your investments, right? Your properties, your rental properties, your bank accounts. You want to place them behind legal barriers and out of your personal name so that they can't be easily, reached by a lawsuit. And we talk on these shows a lot about, you hear, them about freedom and financial freedom a lot. And we're entering this new information era age where, we have nation states and regulators and even civil courts that are starting to become predatory. And it's not by accident, but by necessity. And so as governments become more insolvent and the legal system becomes more polarized and politicalized, asset protection is no longer just smart, it's essential. So we're shifting from a world where protection came from a centralized system like the government, right? The legal system, to one where now you're going to have to be your own protector. And so the wealthy don't own things in their own personal name. Their LLCs, their limited partnerships do, their asset protection trusts do. And then by layering it, it starts getting to be, stronger, different levels of protection. But what we don't want is to see you own like 10 properties all in your personal name or stuff all 10 properties into just one LLC. That's just crazy. That's going to be asking for a lot of trouble. But this next part's really important. Asset protection is not about hiding money. It's not about dodging and avoiding paying taxes. That is illegal. You're taxed on your worldwide income as a US person, even if you move to Puerto Rico for cryptocurrencies or you're Elon Musk mining an asteroid for trillions of dollars, in space. This is not about deception. It's about defense, just smart, legal, court-proven defense. And so where most people get it wrong is they think that irrevocable living trust will protect them from lawsuits. They think that owning 20 rental properties in one LLC is smart. They think just having insurance will save them. They think the judicial system is their friend. And in all those situations, they're just completely wrong. LLCs are pierced regularly. Domestic trusts do not block lawsuits. They're not designed to. They don't have the teeth to. They can't. Insurance companies deny claims all the time. The bureaucratic court system is not about justice any longer. So there's two big takeaways I want your listeners to come away with is asset protection is not tax evasion. So if someone tells you like, hey, set up this trust and you'll never pay taxes again, just hang up the phone and run away from them. That's a complete scam. The IRS is very strict on this, and they even devote an entire page to trust scams to identify that. And then number two is asset protection only works when it's done before there's a problem. So once a lawsuit starts, it's too late. Like whatever you have in place is locked in during that lawsuit. We can't add any new layers at that point. So that's why we build systems before there's a threat, right? Not afterwards. We're not going to try to like add new layers of defense when the castle's already being attacked. And if you want, there's a really good case that I can break this down that simplifies this if you want.
Sure.
Yeah, so there's a 2010 case. It's called SEC versus Solo. Here is a situation where the husband, Mr. Solo, was nailed by the SEC for a fraudulent trading scheme. So just think like bad man doing bad things, right? So after they hit him with a judgment, so after the lawsuit, he transferred assets like millions of dollars into his wife's offshore trust, trying to shield them. So this is just like, it doesn't pass the sniff test, right? The straight up fraud. The court saw through it and he was held in civil contempt of court. But here's where the twist actually comes in the story is the offshore trust still worked. The SEC couldn't touch the assets. So what do we learn from this case? Well, there's two things that we break down from this Supreme Court case. One is that offshore trusts are incredibly powerful when they're structured right, which we can break that down when we talk about trust later on. And number two is really timing matters. So Mr. Stola was held in contempt of court, not because the trust structure or the trust structure was wrong, but because he acted after the judgment. He was too late to the game. He did this after the fact, after the lawsuit, after the judgment. So it's like trying to buy car insurance to cover the car accident you just had after you got in the car accident. It just doesn't work that way. So the big takeaway really is that you have to plan before the lawsuit hits. After that, you're out of time.
So this is a pre like an insurance, basically in a way that it you have to have it before anything happens, and that's the way of going about it.
Correct. And
Is
I
it
get
is it like a layered trust system where you have a trust, you have a holding company, et cetera, or is it something else?
It's essentially like that. So base layers, right? Like I talk about how asset protection structures should be set up. And I use this analogy of like dressing to go out on a winter's day because I think, like we understand the concept of layering clothing when we're going outside, like in a snowy day. So the tools that you typically use when it comes to protecting your assets are LLCs as holding companies, limited partnerships as management companies, and then asset protection trust. And if we break down the layers and when we layer them, the first layer, the entry base layer, is your LLC. It's like that thin shirt that sits on your skin. This is an LLC. Like you're just starting out investing. Maybe you have under 250,000 of, net worth, 0 to 1 or 2 properties. Like you're a greenhorn investor just starting out. And then as you grow and you start adding more assets and you hit around that like 4 doors, 4 units, 4 property mark, maybe you're starting to invest in different states. So you have multiple LLCs. You have around 500,000 to 700,000 net worth. We're going to want a mid layer, right? This is going to be like a management company. This is going to be a little bit thicker, generally like a merino wool sweatshirt for guys, a cardigan for you ladies. This is your management company. And then when we hit around that 1 million net worth mark, or maybe you have a high risk profession like you're a doctor and investing in real estate or 100% real estate investor, you're going to want an outer shell waterproof layer. This is going to keep you nice and dry and warm when the weather is really bad. This is your doomsday lawsuit protection layer. Like, oh my God, we're getting sued for $1 million or more. We're going to lose everything. That's where the asset protection trusts start coming in. But by layering like that now, you're more flexible. You can adjust to make yourself more comfortable. And so that's what the systems generally look like. Base layer, bottom LLCs, next rung up, management companies, limited partnerships. Next run up would be asset protection trust.
Got you. The way I was explained by another attorney was LLC is held by the holding company, which is held by the trust, which is like a revocable family trust, and
So that's
you
where
said
the
same layers.
same layers, just the wrong layer at the top because the
Okay,
revocable living trust can't protect you when you're from a lawsuit. They're not designed to. They can't. Like even if you're in Florida, because you can't have them self-settled. Florida, for example, doesn't have self-settled regulations, spendthrift legislation. So all asset protection trusts are self-settled. And then you can't have it, there's beneficiary, limitations of what you can do in a trust, even in Florida. I know where like you guys are kind of based out of. So then what do we do there? So a revocable living trust won't do anything for you because it's just for probate, right? Like what do we
okay.
do when we die? Where do the assets go? How do we not pay, taxes on it? Who gets what, when, where, how, and why? Asset protection trusts are saying, I'm living now, I'm going to keep investing, but I can get sued. How do I protect my assets? So you don't want the revocable living trust at the top of the rung. You want an asset protection trust at the top. I can always connect the estate plan into the asset protection trust, though.
Okay, got you. That makes a lot of sense, by the way. And it's great that you have that system down. So let's go back to the LLCs now.
Yeah, no. So let's break down like the baby layer, right?
Yeah. First one. Let's go on the first layer. What exactly is an asset protection trust? We already talked about that. Sorry.
Yeah, we'll do the trust. We can do the trust later.
Yeah.
There's a lot of myths and issues with and misconceptions with LLCs. And the myths are that like they're a one size fits all silver bullet, like dragon slayer. People treat them like a magic pill that solves everything. But let's be honest, like they miss the first letter, first word, like limited. They don't hide that fact. They tell us this straight up in their name. But don't get me wrong, like I'm not anti-LLC. I use them obviously all the time. That's what we put risky assets in, like real estate, to hold them in. But we just need to understand what the role of LLCs actually are. LLCs are foundational. So think of them like the base layer of clothing on that cold day. They're necessary, but it's not sufficient. If you think one LLC is going to shield you from a $1 million lawsuit, you're walking into a winter storm here just wearing a t-shirt. So we use LLCs to separate out risk. Anything with a key or that requires insurance and can go boom and hurt people are going to go into an LLC as a holding company. And then we start layering in like management companies and the trust on top of it. But the real protection comes from the structures as they scale. The next part of this, though, is where do we actually set these things up in? It's called, jurisdiction shopping. You hear about like Wyoming, Delaware, Texas, Florida, Nevada. And so it gets a lot of confusion on just where do we go to set these things up in? And it'd probably be really important to break this part of it down. The real question is, what are you trying to protect against and where is the asset actually held at? So here's an example. And I use California a lot just because I love picking on California. I think most people like to pick on California, so I'll just keep doing it. So let's say you're a California resident, and it works if you're a Florida resident as well, and then you form a Wyoming LLC. And then you think that you're magically adopting Wyoming laws. But if that LLC owns California real estate or Florida real estate, and you're paying California franchise tax because you're, a resident of that state, you've just domiciled or converted your Wyoming LLC into California, or if you're in Florida, a Florida LLC. And if you get sued, that state laws like California, if you live there, that law is going to apply. That was made crystal clear in a 2023 Supreme Court case called Mallory versus Norfolk. So here the court ruled that states can assert jurisdiction over any companies that are registered to do business in that state, regardless of where it was formed. So you can't just go and buy another state's better legal protections and then bring them into a hostile legal environment like California and then expect them to travel with you. It doesn't work that way. So just running off, because you hear like, just go create a Wyoming LLC isn't going to do anything for you if you're a resident of another state and have assets in a different state.
What if you're holding companies in Wyoming and your
What's that?
LLC? It's holding your LLC that's, let's say, in California, and you're holding companies in Wyoming, and your trust is in
Yeah, so
Wyoming.
you mean like the management company?
Yeah.
Yeah, so you should use the order would be the holding company would be created in the state the asset is in. So if it's like a Florida property, Florida
Yeah.
LLC. Then for the management company, you could use Wyoming as the management company. You could use like Arizona. We actually don't use LLCs as the management company. We use limited partnerships because they're just better. And the reason for a limited partnership at the second layer as the management company versus an LLC is that there's multiple reasons, but the number one is by statute, by law, there's only one way to create a limited partnership by distinguishing the managing member from the owner. So you have a very clear bylaw statutory distinction between two different classes of ownership. You can't do that with an LLC. They're just not designed to. And so when you get sued and you try to get creative with the LLC operating agreements and try to mimic an LP, a judge is going to review it and say, this is the wrong entity. We don't do LLCs like this. You should have used a limited partnership. And that's one of the easiest ways that you pierce the LLC veil is by trying to get really creative with the operating agreements. And then when a judge looks at it, they're going to say, this operating agreement doesn't comply with our state laws. No, thank you. Should have used a limited partnership. So we want to make sure when we set things up, they're done properly by the law, right? And so there's only one way that you can do a limited partnership. So that's the game we want to play is separate legally managing members from owners.
Okay. And then limited partnership, don't you need a partner? So let's say I own four businesses and I'm the owner of four businesses and I'm the sole member LLC. I'm
Yeah.
sole member. So we also have a partnership, which let's say this is my case. Let's say I have my wife and we have a partnership, which we hold our complex in, but I single-handedly own three more companies where it's a single member LLC. Now, my understanding, partnership is two people, and an LLC, you could be a solo person or you could be multiple people.
Yeah. And so what you have for the limited partnership is they're created for you and your spouse.
Yes.
Those are the partner. You and your spouse are the partner. Now, if you're single, it would just be you, and then you would use like a Wyoming LLC as your other partner.
Oh,
Um,
okay, got you.
and then when you're integrating in LLCs to the bottom up, what you're doing is, let's just say, for example, you own 50% of an LLC, and then you have a business partner that has the other 50% of an LLC. We're just integrating your 50% into the limited partnership.
Got you, got you, got you. And any common mistakes real estate investors make when using an LLC or setting up their LLCs?
Yeah, a lot. The biggest one, and it's generally, when they're having their CPA do it, and it's not the CPA's fault. They just don't look at things from the legal standpoint. They look at it from the tax standpoint, is have it elected to pay taxes as an S corp. And so the issue with that, yeah, it's great for taxes, but then I can't merge it into a limited partnership or anything else. And then two, I can't, this is where the big issue is, especially depending on if you own the assets and something being taxed as an S corp for a long period of time, is if I have to move like real estate out of the LLC, of that LLC or S corp, you owe all the deferred taxation back. Most of the people don't have that much money sitting in their bank account. So then the assets are just stuck. So I can't do anything to actually protect you. And a great example is this was I get this call about once every month. Is my CPA created an S corp for me, and about 10, 15 years ago, and over that time I have about 20 properties in there worth about X amount of millions of dollars. But I realized I have way too many assets in one LLC, and I'm way exposed. I need to spread it out and add the next layers. What can you do for me? Probably nothing, because I don't think you have all that year's worth of deferred taxation back to pay to the IRS. And so we can't move the assets out. Was it the CPA's fault? No, because I'm sure the client called in saying, hey, I want to create an entity and not pay much in taxes. So what's the CPA going to say? Create an S corp,
Can you
LLC tax.
give those properties over to the other entity since you
Well,
own the other entity?
I can't move them out, because if I move them out, you're going to potentially trigger a massive tax hit.
Like a capital gains tax on
Yeah.
it?
Yeah, and I can't
But
integrate the S corp into any other entity if it's taxed as an S corp, because they have to be owned by a person.
but if you move them out for the same price you purchased it at over to the next entity.
It's generally, you're going to end up all the deferred taxation. If you're moving $10 million worth of real estate that you've had in an S corp for like 10 years, you've had all that growth and deferred taxation that you've been kicking. And then that's where the issue comes in, is you're going to have to end up paying the IRS back.
You're thinking like depreciation and stuff like that, or you're thinking about the just a gain on its value in 10 years.
The taxable side of it, talk to your CPA. All I know is when we start having to move a real estate asset out of anything taxed as an S corp, you're always going to involve a massive tax hit.
I don't hold any of my properties in S corps.
Yeah, so that's where you don't. That's why it's not as simple as like calling up an asset protection attorney and saying, "Hey, I want to move some assets out of a business structure," because we have to look at, yeah, can I move them? Yeah. Can you afford it on the tax side of it? It depends how the entity is being taxed and structured. And so that's where we have to say, hey, before we move these assets out, if they're held in something like an S corp, call your CPA and make sure they give you a calculation on how much you're going to owe back to the IRS.
Correct.
And
Okay.
if it's not a large amount, great. If it's a large amount, that's generally where we end up can't doing anything for the client, because they can't afford that bill.
Yeah, I mean that's a big tax bill for
Yeah.
sure. Unless they want to get a hit or something or 10. I don't even know if you could 1030 into your own company. That's just strange. I would have to ask someone on that topic. We talked about, asset protection trusts and how it's different from revocable trusts. Now I had a question about how can real estate investors use these trusts to stay a step ahead of any lawsuit.
Yeah. So we got to think about like trust first. And this is where a lot of people get hiccups on trust. They think all trusts are the same. And you need to think about trust like ice cream, right? Like Baskin Robbins, 31 flavors. Lots of different types of trust exist, and they're used for a lot of different types of reasons. And so we already talked about revocable living trusts and what they are and their limitations for protecting assets. Then you have like land trusts, which people are pretty common in hearing. So these are often used for privacy in real estate, but
Yep.
they don't actually protect you. Their strength is only as strong as the LLC that they're connected to. And then if that LLC gets pierced, then the land trust falls apart. there's no more protection. And then there's tax trusts, right? Like Delaware trust, generational wealth skipping trust, spousal trust, like lots of different types of names of trust that are tax focused, but they're not lawsuit focused. And then enter the world of asset protection trust. And so what asset protection trusts are is they're called self-settled spendthrift trust. And so self-settled means it's created for you by you as your own beneficiary. All asset protection trusts are irrevocable, meaning that its terms and its provisions are fixed and that a judge just can't force you to change it. Like revocable means I can revoke it and change it whenever I want. And if I can do it, a judge can order me to do it, right? To
Correct.
where this is irrevocable, completely different type of trust, right? Like ice cream, one's chocolate, one's vanilla, both ice cream, just different things. And then spendthrift provisions are like the teeth that give these trusts protection. When it comes to real estate, how do these trusts work? The trust owns the whole system. And then when a lawsuit happens and we have to trigger our trust, um, the there's a code section that's called a unilateral withdrawal on demand, and it can say, "Hey, I'm the trust. I own you, limited partnership, and all the assets that are in you. I demand all my assets, and I'm disconnecting from you." And then, depending on what jurisdiction we set the trust up in, like for us and our clients, we use the Cook Islands and then domesticate it back to the US for tax purposes. We're now on the strongest jurisdiction in the world where even if a judgment was entered against our clients, it's completely worthless. And then that gives us the leverage to say either like, go pound sand or take a penny on the dollar, and that's
Yeah.
generally what happens is a penny on the dollar and it goes. But just realize for this purpose, like not all trusts are the same. So if you have a family estate plan, do not think it's an asset protection plan. Land trust privacy. If you want to protect assets from judgments and lawsuits, you need a specific type of asset protection trust. Um, from there, we have domestic asset protection trust. The problem here is almost all domestic trusts now just don't hold up in court. Judges are piercing them left and right. Courts are ignoring the choice of law clause and they're applying their own state's public policy to just completely blow them up. And that's the judge's real superpower is their powerful wand of public policy. And then we have cases on this like In re Hubbard, Bately versus Morrison, Dale versus Dale, 21 versus Wacker. And these are all really good cases. And all these defendants should have won these cases. But based off of public policies, the judges just said, no, we're piercing through the trust, and a pierced trust means complete loss of assets. And we have a lot of cases in this, and one in particular, because I know you're in Florida, right, is Monette versus Brown. Florida courts don't allow you to be your own beneficiary. So if you're trying to create Florida asset protection trust, well, it's not going to be a self-settled trust. You're not going to get the protection that you want. So that's where even in good states like Florida and Texas, where they're considered asset protection friendly states,
Yeah.
I'm going to twist that a little bit. They're good tax friendly states, but they're actually about as good as California when it comes to asset protection because they don't recognize self-settled spendthrift legislation. You can't be your own beneficiary, and you still have to worry about a judge's public policy superpower. And so, even in those good states like Texas and Florida, we still use hybrid trust because of those situations.
Yeah. We talk about assets. Those include your investments in stocks as well as real estates and life insurance policies, et cetera, et cetera?
Yeah, great question. So yeah, when we're looking at exposed net worth, right, and assets, what is exposed? In Florida, you have that beautiful homestead exemption, so that's
Yes.
not exposed. But if you're in another state, I don't know how far your audience, reach goes out, but if you're out of Florida, besides Florida and Texas, those are the two best homestead exemption states in the US. The rest of them, they're really not worth, writing home about. So we got to worry about how to protect the equity of your home. Florida, 100% homestead exemption. That's beautiful. 401ks, exempt assets, right? Because they're protected under the federal ERISA. Um, what is it? IRA plans. Almost every state has good protection under, for your IRA plan. So we leave those alone. Rental properties exposed, stock portfolios that are not retirement accounts fully exposed. People confuse this one. Cryptocurrencies exposed. Just because you buy digital currencies doesn't mean it doesn't exist and we can hide it. It's just treated just like a stock. So we got to protect the digital currencies. Life insurance cash value is going to depend state by state. The best one is Texas. It's 100% exemption on the cash value. The rest of the states not really that great. So we merged the IULs or whole life insurance policies into the asset protection plan and protect the cash value from that.
So we basically stock everything into the trust.
Everything.
The
Yeah.
trust owns everything, no matter what it
Trust
is.
owns everything. We just put them into the right bucket and the bucket funnels up into the trust. And then we're literally protecting everything.
Okay. Because I mean, I'm a big Tony Robbins fan.
Yeah.
And he's like, diversify, diversify, diversify. You can't just keep buying real estate and be in one asset class. Basically, you have to have exposure to a lot of different options to be secure. Now, how do we secure? That's financially secure, as meaning in if one goes down, the other one can still go up. So financially, you're secure. But are you secure in the level of a legal?
Yeah. And I can take it back off of that is then you want, global diversification across borders with your asset protection plan. And that's kind of like where we're talking about like hybrid asset protection trust is what's the biggest downfall of a domestic asset protection trust? The two biggest ones are not every state recognizes them. Most states don't have self-settled spendthrift legislations. And we have a U.S. Constitution, full faith and credit clause. We can't outrun another state's legal judgments on us, right? Well, I can go instead of being subject to one judge, one court, one area. I can create a Cook Islands trust that's outside the reach of a U.S. judge. Now have jurisdictional diversification globally, but then the IRS has this beautiful code section 7701 that says, "Look, Lancelot, we know you have an offshore trust. Good. We really don't care. Congratulations. But to make your life easier so you don't have to do all the mandatory disclosures and full trust disclosures and 1035s, 1035As, and FACTA disclosures, we'll classify it domestically for you until you need to utilize it for its purpose." And that takes all those mandatory disclosures out of the board. You don't have to do any of them, no tax disclosures. So it simplifies your life. But we have that strength in the back pocket if, God forbid, that doomsday lawsuit comes your way. So then that's the Tony Robbins principle of diversification, but now we're doing it from a legal asset protection standpoint.
Oh, for sure. And now we're talking about offshore trusts, etc. Would you be able to invest in other stock markets, for say Singapore or Moscow or wherever, like if you wanted to with these trusts?
Yeah, I mean, as long as there's no, because you're still a U.S. citizen, so you're still
Yes.
going to be subject to the regulations and limitations of what you as a U.S. citizen in the U.S. are actually going to be able to do. So if there's no like trade embargo or something like that, then yeah. But just because I create an offshore trust doesn't mean like I'm going to completely start ignoring, trade regulations and laws like that.
No, no, no. I was just like meaning that you could open an LLC in a
Oh yeah.
different country and you could
Oh
trade
yeah.
under your LLC in a different country or buy properties or if it's allowed by the country to buy. Because
Yeah. No,
I come from
yeah,
Hungary and in Hungary, you can only buy property if
yeah.
you're Hungarian.
Yeah, no, and so exactly. And so we have clients, I have clients throughout the world, and
Yeah.
a lot like US citizens that have foreign real estate, and then foreign clients that have US real estate. And so it's not going to limit you on the system on where you're going to go out and buy.
Could you pop in assets from a different country into this trust?
You can. How I would do it is differently though. Like I would not connect it into like a US based LLC or the management company. You would go to that country wherever it is. Like we'll just say like Spain, and you
Yeah.
would say like, all right, what's the Spanish version of an LLC
LLC.
there? And then I would not connect it to the limited partnership because it's again US jurisdiction. I'd probably use like a Nevis or something LLC and then connect that to the trust there. Or you can connect it directly to the trust if you want. It just depends on what the asset is. But yes.
Okay. That's really intriguing. I own property over in Hungary, part of property between my brothers and I. And it's just I'm like, what's going to happen to that when I pass to my kids? How is it going to happen? How's it going to go to my kids? Like it's always
Yeah.
a good question, and what's going to happen there?
Well, in some countries, it's not necessary. For example, like I have a client who owns a bunch of real estate in Poland, and it's like, yeah, you're realistically not going to get sued apparently in that country because the legal system is not set up to promote lawsuits. So people there just rarely ever sue anybody, how it used to be in the US, 40 years ago. But now our system here is so litigious, like we have almost no choice if you're going to own something. But there, it's almost unheard of to create, a business structure or a trust to own anything because people, it's just not part of their culture.
No, it's not. In Hungary, it takes 2, 3 years to litigate something.
Yeah.
So anytime you're like looking at a lawsuit, I'm like, do you have the patience to wait for it for 3 years, to finish? And then sometimes it exuberantly long time, like insane, because there's a hiccup. Now redraw, redo, boom, clock starts ticking again. Like, what's the point of having judges and attorneys if it takes so long to do anything?
Yeah.
It's just crazy. Here in the States, it's like boom, boom. It's so quick. It's the same with criminals. You were a litigation attorney. So here in the States, you get in front of a judge fairly quickly. In Hungary, you could sit in jail for a year and a half too before you get in front of a judge.
Yeah, the criminal stuff is designed to happen, faster. Civil things can drag out for a long time in civil
Yeah.
law. Like you can file a lawsuit fast, but then you can drag out the discovery phase for years.
Oh, got you. I Knock on wood, I haven't had the luck or
Yeah.
not luck to
Uh,
to have a
it's more
lawsuit yet.
emotional. I always tell people it's more of an emotional, situation getting sued, and that's part of the should we settle or not? Well, how much do you have the emotional wherewith and band, and how does your family have it to drag out a lawsuit, for years? And so
Yeah,
that's
exactly.
where the conversation goes.
So for those of us in Florida, what unique legal advantages do we have, or risks we should know when it comes to trusts and protection?
Yeah, like I mentioned before with the trust is just the limitations in Florida for self-settled, right? Like you would think because everyone considers Florida to be a great asset protection state, but it's really not. It's a great tax state, right? With the
Yeah,
homestead exemption. But then you heard me mention Florida courts don't allow you to be your own beneficiary, and that's, Florida state law in Monette versus Brown in 2002. So that's not even like it was a change. So there are limitations to how you can protect your assets even in Florida. But positive is the homestead exemption. That's kind of like how O.J. Simpson, yeah, he was found not guilty for murdering, his wife and the boyfriend, but then got convicted on the civil side of it, but then never had to pay a penny because his Florida mansion was exempted, and then his NFL pension was federally protected, and so he ended up not having to pay a penny out of it. So that just goes to the power of what an exemption can actually do for you.
Oh wow! I also heard that land trusts here are a really good
So, like I
hiding place in
It's
Florida.
not, yeah. So the thing is, like, hiding doesn't really work, right? It's like anonymity. Like privacy is great, but privacy and hiding doesn't mean protection, because all that is like once the LLC gets sued, you have to appear in court. So there is no more privacy at that point in time. And then you're gonna have to go do the disclosures because once you get sued and you get put in front of like a creditor's examination, you have to disclose the assets that you own, or say I own nothing and can commit perjury and go to jail. And so land trusts, again, are good for privacy, but they're not good for protection because they're only going to be as strong as the LLC that they're connected to. So land trusts, you can get privacy through limited partnerships and asset protection trusts. If you're just starting out, that's when I would say, all right, you can't afford, like a $30,000 asset protection structure with everything, but you have a couple properties, yeah, like an LLC and a land trust, if that's going to be like where you're kind of done, get some protection, get some privacy, and then we're going to call it wraps. But as you scale and grow and your visibility gets bigger, that land trust isn't going to do anything for you. Privacy is good for avoiding harassment. Doesn't mean you're going to ghost a lawsuit and no one's ever going to discover you.
I mean, I think in a way, privacy gives you a slight bit of protection because let's say there's an ambulance chaser, as you said, you get in a car accident. Yes, you might have a decent kind of car, but if you have most of your properties, investment properties and land trusts, and they only see that you have one house in your name, that's your primary residence. You get what
That
I'm
doesn't,
saying?
it doesn't, where I did so much plaintiff work, it
Oh
never,
yeah,
that's not how it plays out.
no. I
No,
just thought it would, like as like a thought, like they can't see all your properties. Your
It might
investments
work
aren't.
for it might be good for like little things like slip and falls and like, 40, $60,000, damage awards. But, if you're a renter, if you own a rental property and your house burns down and someone dies in it, like you're gonna get sued for $1 million. And just because it's in a, an anonymous Wyoming LLC or land trust, it's not gonna stop the lawsuit.
No, no, no. Even if it's from lightning strike. It's like, hey, the lightning. It was the lightning. It wasn't the wiring. I
Yeah.
promise you. Let's talk about your book a little bit. Overexposed. How did it become a number one bestseller? I mean, what's inside that book? What inspired you to write it? And
Yeah.
what do
So
you hope every reader walks away with?
Yeah, so I'm gonna start working on version 2 because some updates of the law have changed, and I'm changing how I'm talking about it a little bit with different examples. But the book was inspired because I just had so many people calling in. Like I talk and do a lot of presentations, and I do go to a lot of seminars. And the constant thing between there and then when I do consultations, in my office is just the what's the word I'm looking for? There's so much misinformation, and there's no horn book that was written on asset protection. And generally, the education stops at LLCs. Create an LLC, here's a land trust, and then there's a lot of books written on that and piercing veils, but there's no one-stop shop information book on saying what are all the layers, like LLCs, management companies, asset protection trust. What are all their pros and cons? How are they all different? How do we layer and structure them all together to create one beautiful system? And then how do we go into them over time? And when I started hearing people talking about these problems and the misinformation and the counter information, what do we do? I'm so confused. And now I'm, stuck in analysis paralysis and there's no guide there. I started researching and I'm like, my gosh, they're right. There is no overall reaching horn book on just the world of asset protection and options. And so I'm like, well, I'll just write it myself. Like I'm just going to take my talking points and my presentations and how I deliver this, and I'll just write the book on it. And that's how it ended up starting, and then it ended up, catching on from there. And what's in the book is kind of just like what we talked about here is how did we get there in the first place? Like, how did things used to be? How did our legal system and tort system get so messed up so we understand the journey? Why are things that used to work in the past not working anymore? What are our options going forward? And then just the true pros and cons. What's effective, cost, IRS compliance, control. And when we're measuring different layers, we always have to look at through those four things. I call it like ECCC, effectiveness, cost, control, compliance. And how many of those boxes are we checking off, or how many checks are we taking away, and why? And that's what we have to evaluate our asset protection structure from. And then when we understand all the pros and cons and the checkbox system, whenever you talk to somebody, you can start understanding like, are they just feeding me the line of BS because they're trying to get a sale from me? Where's the case law? So there's a lot of case law in it, which I don't think very many people provide people case law when they do these consultations. So I wanted to clear up the world and the BS level so they can have a more educated, clear mind when they're trying to make a really big decision on how do I not lose everything that I built going forward.
That makes a lot of sense. And thank you for writing that book, by the way. I'm sure a lot of investors and people like myself out there will have a great use of it. I mean, all the time, I'm looking at my feed, scrolling through Facebook. A lot of people talk about asset protection. I mean, mumbo jumbo, trust, holding company,
Yeah.
LLCs, blah blah blah. And they draw it on the whiteboard and everything, and it's like, oh, yeah, I should do that. I should do something. But they all talk about, I think, as you said earlier, tax evasion. How do I get taxed less? And that's kind of like their intro on that. And it's actually more, as you said, legal protection instead of talking about how you can not evade but pay less taxes.
Yeah, well, and the issue with that, like, I'll hit with that one real quick, is if I were to create an asset protection structure for you to not pay taxes, that's hindering right there, and that's tax avoidance. That is the definition of fraud. The system itself then is going to crumble because it's not designed to prevent, lawsuits for the future. It's designed to hide, hinder, and delay, like, and not pay taxes. And so if there were any legal way for me to have someone not pay taxes, my phone would never stop ringing. I'd be everybody's best friend. That goes to the
Yes.
point like that it doesn't exist. Like you have to legally pay your taxes. How much is just how creative can we utilize the tax code as a treasure map to then figure out how like legally how do I pay as least amount of taxes as possible? But if you're going to come to me and say create the trust to have me not pay taxes, that's where we get into fraud.
Yeah, I mean, you could protect with the trust, I think, if I remember correctly, like a revocable trust, etc., for inheritance purposes, that you have your children in as owners of the trust or trustees in the trust as well, and they automatically become owners of the properties if you pass because the
And
properties are
those,
owned by
those
the
that's called
trust.
that's probate. That's just passing along assets, right? Like
Exactly.
different types of trust, or like charitable trust, tax generational. Like those are different types of trust where we can take a percentage of money, stick it into there, right? But when we're looking at the whole overall structure and saying, I have $100 million like to my name of everything, and I want to never pay taxes on this, again, create the system for it, and then make sure it's invisible. That's where if you go to like the Bahamas, and
Yeah,
those areas like tax evasion, that's where people start going to jail.
I get that for sure. I mean, I don't know if you heard, but DeSantis or here in Florida, they're discussing to remove property taxes on I don't know if all properties or only primary residences, but I think that would be phenomenal for anybody in this country, and every state should do it because if there's a tax on your primary residence, guess what? You don't really own your property, even though your name's on the title, but the government owns it because if you don't pay your taxes, they come in and they take it. So
I preaching to the choir, man. Like imagine that you own your home free and clear and you still got to pay the property taxes on
yeah,
it. That
it's
makes
like
no sense to me.
what's the point of that? Like let's figure out a way to increase taxes on something else so you don't have to pay taxes on your primary residence because we have a lot of retirees in Florida and you know that and it just on a fixed income taxes are rising it hurts them a lot especially if like well I would like to move from here but they're like I can't because if I sell my house and I move to another house um let's say they want to move from a lakefront to a riverfront or an oceanfront or just in a condo, just because they like I can't mow the lawn anymore and I can't have a single family anymore. When they move, they come uh they almost inherit a totally new tax, basically a higher tax.
Hmm.
And yes, there is some kind of you could move some of your old taxes over, but it's still going to be higher than it was before. And if you're in a fixed income like a Social Security or anything like that, it hurts, man. It hurts, and
Well, that's
I
why I
could feel
think
their
it comes,
pain.
yeah, like the bureaucracy that we were talking about in the beginning is, like when it comes to like taxes and politics and economies and things like that, like the real issue with asset protection is just like the lack of tort reform at the end of the day. And so that means like the legal system is just going to remain a weapon, for wealth extraction, regardless of what's happening, right, with global trends or macro trends or local trends. At the end of the day, like we're really fighting the bureaucracy.
Yeah, yeah, totally agreed. So if you had to give just one piece of advice to new investors with growing assets, what would it be? I know it would be get the trust, but
No, actually, that's not my advice. My advice would just be and it goes to like any field and stage of life. You can't get stuck in analysis paralysis. Eventually, you just have to jump in the end of the deep, like the deep end of the pool, start kicking your hands and feet and making yourself go, right? So you read your couple books, you listen to your stuff. We're gonna have to make an educated decision in life, whether it's like, yeah, pull the trigger on the property or don't. Like, yes, set up asset protection, don't. Yes, create the business or don't. But not doing something because you're too afraid to make a decision is where you will always fail. So fail falling forward, just make decisions and get going.
I agree with that 100%. So does Robert Kiyosaki and Tony Robbins and everybody had bigger pockets. It's
Yeah.
just pulling that trigger and getting going with it and then figuring it out on the way a little bit. I mean, yes, get a little educated. Don't jump
No,
into something
that's part
without
of
any
learning and falling
knowledge.
forward. Yeah, you're gonna fail. Just
Yeah.
don't make the same mistake twice, but you'll grow faster and you'll learn more. But if there's a million books to read, if you read every million books, you'll die and you'll never do anything.
Yeah. Like a professor, you'll stay stuck in a
Yeah.
school teaching whatever you.
Teaching theory that doesn't work.
Yeah, you have all the theory, but you don't have any of the practice part of
Yeah.
it. Yeah. And for agents representing high net worth clients, how can we better guide them in conversation about legal protection?
I would just say like, hey, look, one, you know how they're going to be closing on title, right? And then you can say, okay, it looks like your high net worth is, oh, have you thought about asset protection? Because it seems like you're pretty exposed. God forbid, like you accumulate this next property, add this next property, and then you lose it in a lawsuit. Suggest you go talk to somebody, an expert, to go get your assets protected.
Awesome. Well, thank you for coming on the show. Whether you're scaling your real estate portfolio or closing deals for high stakes clients, today's market demands more than just hustle. It demands legal foresight. If you're relying solely on your LLC or haven't yet considered an asset protection trust, now's the time to rethink your strategy. Huge thanks to Brian Bradley for dropping serious knowledge today. If you want to learn more about how to fortify your assets and avoid becoming overexposed, grab his best-selling book, Overexposed, or visit his website, which is going to be down in the comment section, and connect with Brian on LinkedIn. It's linkedin.com /in/Brian T. Bradley Esquire. And then a number that's also going to be in the comment section. Start making smarter legal moves. If this episode helped shift your thinking, share it with your fellow agents or investors. And don't forget to subscribe, rate, and leave a review. If it helps us bring you more heavy hitters like Brian to our show. Until next time, keep closing deals and protecting what you've built. Take care, everybody. Thank you for joining us on Sir Lancelot's Real Estate Roundtable, where we've unveiled the mysteries of real estate together. Remember, in this kingdom of possibilities, every dream home is just a discussion away. I can help your real estate dreams come true. Just call me at 786-449-7518. Until our next roundtable, may your ventures be prosperous and your homes be filled with love and joy. Farewell, fellow knights of real estate.